Well, hello again. Another big question for the yes or no treatment. As they say, some of them, they don't come any bigger than this. This one is there free will? Well, what's free will? Free will really means the ability to choose from among alternatives and to take action on them independent of any religious, social, genetic, cultural restraints on you. That's free will. And of course the opposite, which is usually referred to as determinism, says that we simply aren't free. We're bound by all of these influences of the past, which simply restrain our ability to think or act independently, because we're just creatures of all of that which has gone before us. Everything is cause and effect. You go back to first cause, they're there, there's nothing you can do about it, and they're influencing you. So there's two different schools of thought. There's the free will people, sometimes referred to as the libertarians, and the determinists, those who don't believe in it. Now, I must say, it's a bit nervy of me to try and address this subject. There's no way that I can do a comprehensive or thorough job of examining this question. It's definitely above my pay grade. But what I hope to do in this video is simply to give you some idea of what some of the issues are, what some of the reasons are for people thinking on both sides of the question, i.e. whether they advocate free will or not. And then, as usual at the end, I'll tell you what I think about it. So I do all of this with appropriate modesty and even some reluctance. I should note that throughout history, this subject has to varying degrees addressed perplexed, concerned philosophers of all sorts. Plato and Aristotle were interested in it. Some of the early Christian theologians like Aquinas and Augustine were. Martin Luther certainly had something to say about free will. The famous German philosophers spent a lot of time on this. Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer particularly, Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, Hume, Scott Hume had a few things to say about it. So there's been a lot of attention given to this subject in the past by some pretty smart people. So it's obviously a big issue, one that has been deemed to have been important in the past, so I guess it's worth looking at. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at what people think about it. So what about those who say, yes, there is free will. It's essential, it's necessary. Well, first of all, on the most basic level, you think of yourself going into Starbucks and getting a cup of coffee, and at the last minute, you choose, rather than having a latte, you're going to have a cappuccino. Well, doesn't that prove really that you have free will? You have the alternative in mind. You have the ability to make decisions about alternatives. So on its simplest level, that seems to be a demonstration of free will. There is also a real dilemma here about thinking of the alternative in revealed religion. Many aspects of Christianity really presume that God is an omniscient and omnipotent character who knows everything that's going to happen, and there are no mysteries to him. And yet, on the other hand, he holds us responsible for our decisions, and says that we're responsible for them, not anything he's done. Well, which is it? So therefore, those who would say we have free will say all this business about God knowing everything that's going to happen, and for that matter, failing in his goodness and his grace to endow us with the ability or inability to make these decisions properly, it proves there's a disconnect there. So what it really says is you've got to kind of look away for any religious framework for determinism and say, hey, you do what you're going to do and you'll be judged accordingly. That's free will. For a number of sociologists, free will is really an essential component of even being a human being. If you are not able to explain or even change your attitude about your plans, what you're going to do, it makes you kind of an automaton, doesn't it? It demeans your humanity, your personhood, and most of us don't believe in that. We believe that we have something to say and we have some inbuilt substance to us that requires that we take a view on things and act accordingly. The issue of the performance of crime is an important challenge to these various theories. Of course, some might say that depending on everything that went before you, your awful circumstances of your upbringing, your bad genes and all the rest of it, you are destined to be a criminal and perhaps even a violent criminal. And in that sense, one could even argue that you're really not responsible for what you've done. Well, I don't think very many jurisdictional, judicial, and even penal authorities believe that. If you go out and murder somebody, you have to be held to account for it. So the notion of determinism just doesn't fit with societal norms, what we know to make sense in the way we live our lives and structure our societies and so forth. So we must accept that free will is there because these decisions are being made all of the time and they affect all of us. Well, psychotherapy, and particularly Freudian psychotherapy, presents an interesting dilemma. At first blush, you might be forgiven for thinking that Freudian therapy presupposes determinism. In other words, your awful behavior is a function of everything that's gone before you, your relationship with your mother, your genes, the bump in the head, whatever, and that therefore you are just a creature of all of this. On the other hand, if that were the case, what would be the point of therapy? The notion of therapy, certainly in the Freudian sense, is that you must go back and confront these influences, these events which have made you the perhaps monster that you are, but in any case created some form of dysfunctional behavior on your part. And therefore, if you do that and come to terms with it and resolve it and so forth, you can get well again. Well, now if that's really the sum and substance of Freud, then he absolutely is a free will advocate. Can't argue it any other way. And finally, a brief comment from Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking said that he's often noticed that those people who preach determinism, predestination, that there's nothing that you can do about what's gone on in the past which will dictate what happens in the future, he has noticed that those people often look both ways before they cross the street. Why would they do that? if they have no ability to influence the outcome of that decision. Okay, well, there's some pretty good arguments for free will. What about those who would say no, it is all predestined. We're all trapped and victims of all of these influences that have been upon us. Oftentimes the specialists in this area divide those influences into external and internal. The external ones have to do with family influence is a huge one, as anyone knows who's ever watched true crime programs, as we often do, and speculate on why the murderer turned out to be the murderer that he was. In any case, external influences like that, like the bump in the head, like traumatic experiences as a young person, and about the events in one's life that disappoint one or encourage one along the way. And then there are internal determinist influences, such particularly as your own personality, your own genetic makeup, any diseases you have, the proverbial bump in the head, and so forth. So there are a lot of these things that together are going to create the real you, and are going to make you be the person you are, make the choices you're going to make, do the things you're going to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the determinist view. The determinist view often arises when dealing with fundamentalist, or maybe we should say authoritarian religions, to the extent that they cause people's brains to shut down in terms of objectively evaluating what they're told or challenging anything and so forth. They become, as we've often seen, automatons. They do absolutely what to be impartial about it, the clergyman or the high priest says, this is the way it is, this is what you're going to do, this is who you are, these are the rules, and we don't want any question about it. That's the way your life is. Well, that becomes a kind of deterministic model, really. And of course, it presents big problems for religion, because at the same time, as I've mentioned earlier, you are asked to atone, to go to confession, to do whatever you have to do to make up for the fact that you've behaved badly. So it's a certain kind of two-faced sort of approach. We absolutely tell you what you're going to do, we tell you what the rules are, etc., but then we ask you to be an independent thinker and to make up your own mind and to make your choices. So there is a bit of a problem there. Both therapists and, for that matter, anthropologists often take the view that all neuroticism, extroversion, even psychotic behavior, all has to do with hormonal processes in the body, events that affect your physiology, your biology, your mental well-being, and in effect you are kind of an automaton. Sorry to say this, but that's the conclusion that a lot of those who look at our brains conclude about us. We're simply going to do what we're programmed to do, and that's determinism. We've mentioned the impact of the determinist theory on criminals, and how much of their past and causal influences have turned them into what they are. The same thing could be said for law-abiding citizens. Law-abiding citizens have noticed that their behavior, in a kind of Darwinian sense, seems to result in approval by the community. They certainly don't run into the problems with the police and the legal system. They don't wind up in jail. So all of these inputs tell them this is the way I've got to behave, and this is what makes sense for me, and therefore I am robotically marching toward good citizenry. I am a creature created by all of those influences, and once again, it's a determinist thing. Well, those aren't really too bad arguments either, and one could understand why one might come down to that side of the argument. Well, I guess it's my take. I must say that I'm a kind of chickening out on this one a little bit. I'm what is sometimes called a soft determinist. Which is to say, I believe there are a huge number of the influences that the determinists talk about that do have a heavy impact on their behavior, but to my way of thinking, that doesn't completely preclude my acting independently of those influences and deciding to do something different. My wife was telling me this morning about a famous pop star who had an early career of appalling behavior. Drug, irresponsible promiscuity, caused a lot of problems, got into some violent situations. He was really a bad chap. And then somehow or other, he saw the light and decided he really had to do something about it and really straighten himself out. And now he's now viewed with great admiration, somebody who not only is a good member of the community and a good chap and everything else, but someone who has overcome some bad problems. So he's a poster boy of soft determinism. He had a lot of this bad stuff going on in his past that caused him to act out and to behave very badly. And then he spontaneously did something about it and exercised his free will and sorted himself out. Well done. By the way, there's a few pretty good quotes that will help us along. One of them by Nehru, the famous Indian statesman and politician, was pretty much these words: "Life is like a game of cards. The hand you are dealt with is determinism. The way you play it is free will." Well, that sounds pretty good. That sounds like a pretty good one. I like Schopenhauer in particular. He's the one that the composer Richard Wagner was somewhat obsessed with. Schopenhauer said, "A man can do what he wills to do, but he cannot control what he wills." And by the way, Albert Einstein agreed with that. Albert Einstein absolutely subscribed to that. You know, there's a pretty smart guy endorsing a point of view. And then finally, Martin Luther said something to the effect of, "Everything you do requires you to take responsibility for it. You are free to act in the right way. You have to make up your mind about what this is," and that was his view. Martin Luther was one of the great minds and one of the really precursors of the Enlightenment. So he's worth listening to as well. So why do we even care about this issue? Well, I think it influences things that go on. It influences policy decisions. For example, what about the view of penal authorities and parole boards? Criminology often comes up in the context of free will and determinism. If the parole board are complete believers in determinism, what they're really saying is that the criminals that they're passing judgment on don't really have responsibility for what they did. Then the only criterion, I would guess, for deciding on whether somebody gets on parole or not is to protect the public. Because they have to assume 100% recidivism. They have to presume that the murderer or the sex offender or whatever, as soon as he gets out, will do it again, and a fairly high percentage of them do. And therefore, the only issue is protection of the public. The whole idea of giving them another chance and so forth then becomes not only irrelevant, but to be ignored. Well, that's a good example of a policy issue that's quite heavily reliant on which way you come out of these things. So there it is. It's an issue that I have only just scratched the surface of, but I hope it interests you. In any case, I got a big kick out of trying to make some sense out of this for myself and put this thing together. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a like, subscribe, comment, etc., and I'll see you with the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.